The clock on the dashboard showed 9:47 p.m. as Commander Lisa Washington merged onto the quiet suburban street that led to her neighborhood. She had just finished another long day at the Pentagon, where budget meetings and strategic planning sessions often stretched well into the evening. The weight of responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders. But it was a burden she carried with pride after 15 years of military service. Lisa adjusted the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of her uniform jacket hanging in the back seat. Even out of uniform, she maintained the posture and discipline that had been drilled into her since basic training. Her mind was already shifting to tomorrow's schedule when she noticed the red and blue lights flashing behind her. She glanced down at her speedometer. 32 miles per hour in a 35 zone? She hadn't been speeding, and she knew her registration was current. Lisa pulled over to the curb, turned off the engine, and rolled down her window. Years of military training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, and this felt like just another routine interaction. Officer David Chen had been patrolling this sector for 3 years now. He was a good cop, the kind who genuinely wanted to help his community, but the job had been wearing on him lately. Too many late nights, too many difficult calls, and too much tension in the air whenever he put on the badge. When he ran the license plate check on the sedan in front of him, it came back clean. But he had noticed the broken taillight during his patrol. David approached the vehicle with his standard procedure in mind. Keep it professional, keep it brief, and get everyone back on their way safely. As he walked up to the driver's side window, he could see the woman behind the wheel had already prepared her documents. She seemed composed, which was always a good sign. "Good evening, ma'am," David said, shining his flashlight briefly to illuminate the interior of the car. "I pulled you over because your left rear taillight is out. Do you have your license and registration available?" Lisa nodded politely. "Of course, officer. I actually wasn't aware of the taillight issue. Thank you for letting me know." She reached toward the passenger seat where her purse sat, moving slowly and deliberately. "I have my driver's license right here, and I believe my registration is in the glove compartment." Something about her calm demeanor and precise way of speaking caught David's attention. Most people were at least a little nervous during traffic stops, but this woman seemed almost professionally composed. She handed him her driver's license through the window, and he noticed her hands were steady. "I also have my military identification if you need that as well," Lisa said, reaching into her wallet again. She had learned over the years that mentioning her service sometimes helped smooth over these types of interactions. David's flashlight beam caught the edge of what looked like an official government card as Lisa pulled it from her wallet. In the dim light and shadows of the evening, he couldn't quite make out what it was, but something about the movement made him instinctively step back from the vehicle. "Ma'am, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them," David said, his voice taking on a more authoritative tone. His training kicked in as he processed what he was seeing. Late evening, quiet street. Someone reaching for what could be anything in the darkness of a car's interior. Lisa looked up, confused by the sudden change in the officer's tone. "I'm sorry. I was just getting my military ID to show you." "Army commander stationed at ma'am, please step out of the vehicle," David interrupted, his hand moving instinctively toward his service weapon. The situation was escalating faster than he had anticipated, and his heart rate was climbing. Everything about this interaction felt different from his usual traffic stops. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She had been through countless interactions with law enforcement during her career, both in the United States and overseas. This was not how these situations were supposed to go. She took a deep breath and tried to project calm. "Officer, I think there might be some confusion here," she said, keeping her voice level and professional. "I'm a United States Army commander, and I was simply trying to provide you with proper identification. May I show you my credentials?" David's mind was racing. The woman's calm confidence was throwing him off. Most people would be showing signs of stress by now, but she seemed almost too composed. His training told him that unusual behavior could indicate a threat, and her repeated mentions of military credentials without actually showing them was raising red flags. "I need you to exit the vehicle now," David repeated, taking another step. Back from the car door, his radio crackled on his shoulder, but he didn't take his eyes off the woman in front of him. Keep your hands visible at all times. Lisa realized that something had gone very wrong in this interaction. She could see the tension in the officer's posture, could hear the stress in his voice. Her military experience told her that de-escalation was the priority now, but she also knew that complying with unclear or contradictory orders could be dangerous. "I'm going to step out of the vehicle slowly," she said, opening the car door with deliberate movements. "My identification is in my hand, and I'd like to show it to you so we can clear up any confusion." As Lisa emerged from the car, David could see her more clearly under the streetlight. She moved with a controlled precision that he found unsettling rather than reassuring. Her continued insistence on showing identification that he couldn't verify was making him increasingly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I need you to put whatever is in your hands down on the ground and step away from the vehicle," David said, his voice now carrying the full authority of his position. He could feel sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. Lisa looked down at the military ID card in her hand, then back at the officer. The situation was spiraling in a direction that made no sense to her.
Yes.
She had been through war zones where the rules of engagement were clearer than what was happening on this quiet suburban street. "Officer, this is my military identification," she said, holding the card up so he could see it. "I'm Commander Lisa Washington, United States Army. I think if you look at this, it will help explain." "Drop it now," David shouted, his hand now resting on his weapon. The woman's refusal to follow his direct orders was escalating the situation beyond his comfort zone. His radio crackled again, and he could hear dispatch asking for his status. Lisa felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that she had experienced in combat situations. But this was different. This was her own country, her own community, and she was being treated like a threat for reasons she couldn't understand. She slowly bent down to place the ID card on the ground, moving with the same careful precision that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments. The streetlight above them flickered slightly, casting shifting shadows across the scene. In the distance, a dog barked, and Lisa could see a few house lights beginning to turn on as neighbors took notice of the police car parked on their quiet street. What had started as a simple traffic stop for a broken taillight was turning into something much more complicated, and neither Lisa nor David fully understood how they had gotten to this point. Lisa placed her military ID card on the asphalt and slowly straightened up, keeping her hands visible as the officer had requested. The cool night air felt sharp against her skin as she tried to process what was happening. In all her years of service, including multiple deployments in high-stress environments, she had never felt this kind of helpless confusion. David stared at the card on the ground, but from his position several feet away, he couldn't make out the details. The lighting was poor, and his focus was split between watching Lisa's movements and trying to assess the situation. His radio crackled again, and this time he reached for it with his left hand while keeping his right hand near his weapon. "Unit 47 to dispatch," David said into his radio, his voice tight with tension. "I need backup at the intersection of Maple and Oak Street. Traffic stop, requesting additional units." The response came back immediately. "Copy that, Unit 47. Backup is en route. To 3 minutes." Lisa heard the radio exchange and felt her heart sink. She knew from experience that once backup was called, situations tended to become more complicated rather than less. More officers meant more perspectives, more potential for miscommunication, and more chances for things to go wrong. "Officer, may I ask why you called for backup?" Lisa asked, keeping her voice as calm and respectful as possible. "I'm fully cooperating with your requests, and I believe if you look at my identification, you'll see that I'm a military officer. There's no threat here." David's eyes never left Lisa as he considered her question. Her continued calm demeanor was actually making him more nervous, not less. In his experience, people who remained this composed during police encounters were either exceptionally law-abiding citizens or individuals who had experienced dealing with law enforcement in ways that concerned him. "Ma'am, I need you to turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," David instructed, his training taking over as he waited for backup to arrive. "We're going to sort this all out, but I need to ensure everyone's safety first." Lisa felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. She was being treated like a criminal suspect for reasons she couldn't understand. But her military training had taught her that arguing with authority figures in tense situations rarely improved outcomes. She turned to face her car and placed her palms flat against the roof. "Officer, I want you to know that I'm going to file a complaint about this interaction," Lisa said, her voice steady but carrying a note of determination. "I've served this country for 15 years and I've never been treated this way by law enforcement. I understand you have procedures to follow, but this seems excessive for a broken taillight." David heard the authority in her voice and recognized the tone of someone accustomed to being in command. But that recognition only added to his uncertainty about the situation. He had dealt with people who claimed to be military before, and some of those encounters had not gone well. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder. Lisa could see the reflection of flashing lights beginning to dance across the windows of nearby houses, where neighbors were turning on their porch lights now. She could see curtains moving as people peered out to see what was happening on their quiet street. 2 more police cars arrived within seconds of each other. Officers Patricia Gonzalez and Michael Thompson emerged from the first vehicle, while Officer Robert Kim stepped out of the second. All 3 officers quickly assessed the scene and approached with their hands resting on their weapons. "What's the situation, Chen?" Officer Gonzalez asked as she took position to David's left, her eyes scanning Lisa and the surrounding area. "Traffic stop for a broken taillight," David replied, his voice sounding strained. "Subject claims to be military. She's been acting unusually calm and keeps trying to show me identification I can't verify in this lighting. She's been non-compliant with several direct orders." Lisa turned her head slightly to address the new officers. "I'm Commander Lisa Washington, United States Army. I've been trying to show Officer Chen my military credentials, but there seems to be some confusion about my actions. I followed every instruction he's given me." Officer Thompson moved closer to examine the ID card that was still lying on the ground, crouched down and used his flashlight to illuminate it, studying the details carefully. After a moment, he looked up at his colleagues with a puzzled expression. "This does appear to be a legitimate military ID," Thompson said, standing up and brushing off his knees. "It shows she's an Army commander, stationed at the Pentagon." The revelation should have de-escalated the situation, but instead, it seemed to create more tension among the officers. They exchanged glances that Lisa couldn't interpret, and she could feel the energy of the scene shifting in ways that made her increasingly uncomfortable. "Military ID cards can be faked," Officer Kim said, his voice carrying a skeptical tone. "We've seen it before. Someone could be using stolen credentials or a fake ID to try to intimidate officers during a traffic stop." Lisa felt a surge of anger at the suggestion that her credentials were fake, but she forced herself to remain calm. Getting emotional now would only make things worse. She knew that her best chance of resolving this situation was to continue cooperating while maintaining her dignity. "Officers, you can verify my identity through your dispatch system," Lisa said, her voice taking on the tone she used when briefing junior officers. "My name is Lisa Washington, and I'm a commander in the United States Army. My service number is available in your military liaison database." Officer Gonzalez stepped forward and gestured for Lisa to face her. "Ma'am, we're going to need to conduct a search to ensure you're not carrying any weapons or other items that could pose a threat. Is there anything in your pockets or on your person that we should know about?" Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process the absurdity of the situation. She was being searched on a public street by police officers who suspected her of being a threat, despite her attempts to identify herself as a military officer. The irony was not lost on her that she had spent years protecting the very freedoms that seemed to be slipping away from her in this moment. "I have my wallet, my car keys, and my cell phone," Lisa replied. "I'm not carrying any weapons or anything else that could be considered threatening." As Officer Gonzalez began to pat down Lisa's pockets, more neighbors had gathered at their windows and doorways. Someone in a house across the street had stepped onto their front porch and was openly watching the scene unfold. Lisa could see the person holding what looked like a cell phone, and she realized that this encounter was likely being recorded. The thought of this humiliating experience being captured on video and potentially shared online made Lisa's stomach turn. She had dedicated her life to serving her country with honor, and now she was being treated like a criminal suspect in front of her own neighbors. Officer Thompson was speaking quietly into his radio, presumably running a check on Lisa's identification and background. The other officers maintained their positions around her, creating a scene that looked far more serious than a simple traffic stop for a broken taillight. Minutes passed in tense silence as they waited for the background check to come back. Lisa remained motionless against her car, her mind racing through the events that had led to this moment. She couldn't understand how a routine traffic stop had escalated to this point, but she was beginning to realize that the situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. The radio in Officer Thompson's hand crackled to life, breaking the tense silence that had settled over the scene. Lisa remained pressed against her car, her hands flat on the roof, while 4 police officers surrounded her on the quiet suburban street. The flashing lights from their patrol cars painted everything in alternating shades of red and blue. "Unit 47, this is dispatch," came the voice through the radio. "We've confirmed the identity check you requested. Lisa Washington is indeed a commander in the United States Army, currently stationed at the Pentagon. Clean record. No outstanding warrants or flags in the system." Lisa felt a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, someone had verified what she had been trying to tell them from the beginning. She expected to hear the officers apologize and send her on her way. But the atmosphere around her didn't seem to change much. Officer Chen looked at his colleagues with an expression that was hard to read. The confirmation of Lisa's identity should have ended this encounter, but something about the entire situation still felt off to him. His training had taught him to trust his instincts, and those instincts were telling him that this wasn't over yet. "Ma'am, we've confirmed your identity," Officer Gonzalez said, stepping closer to Lisa. "However, we still need to complete our investigation of this traffic stop. There are some inconsistencies we need to address." Lisa turned her head slightly, confusion evident in her voice. "What inconsistencies?" "I've told you the truth from the beginning. I'm a military officer. I was driving home from work and you pulled me over for a broken taillight. What else is there to investigate?" The question hung in the air for a moment. David Chen found himself struggling to articulate exactly what was bothering him about this encounter. The woman had been cooperative. Her credentials were legitimate, and she hadn't done anything overtly suspicious. But years of police work had taught him that sometimes the most dangerous situations were the ones that appeared routine on the surface. "Commander Washington," Officer Kim said, using her rank for the first time. "We need to understand why you were reaching for items in your vehicle during the initial contact. Officer Chen reported that you made several movements toward your purse and other areas of the car without permission." Lisa felt her frustration building again. "I was getting my driver's license and registration, just like any normal traffic." "Stop. When the officer asked for my documents, I retrieved them. Then I offered to show my military ID to help clarify the situation. I don't understand what was wrong with any of those actions." Officer Thompson was studying the military ID card that was still lying on the ground where Lisa had placed it. Even in the harsh light of the police flashlights, he could see that it appeared genuine. The photo matched the woman in front of him, and all the security features seemed to be in place. "The issue, ma'am, is that you continued reaching for items even after Officer Chen asked you to keep your hands visible," Thompson explained. "In police work, we have to treat any unexpected movement as a potential threat until we can determine otherwise." Lisa closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had been in enough high-stress situations during her military career to understand the importance of following security protocols. But this felt different. It felt like she was being treated as guilty until proven innocent, rather than the other way around. "I understand officer safety is important," Lisa said, her voice carrying the weight of her military experience. "But I've been in combat zones where the rules of engagement were clearer than what I'm experiencing here tonight. I followed every instruction I was given, and I've been nothing but respectful and cooperative." The mention of combat zones seemed to register with some of the officers. Officer Gonzalez had served in the military herself before joining the police force, and she recognized the tone of someone who had seen real danger and knew how to handle herself in difficult situations. A car drove slowly past the scene, its driver craning their neck to see what was happening. Lisa could see more neighbors had come outside now, some standing on their porches, others gathering in small groups on the sidewalk. The quiet residential street had become the center of unwanted attention. "Ma'am, we're going to need you too." "Empty your pockets completely," Officer Kim said, his hand resting on his equipment belt. "We need to make sure you're not carrying anything that could be used as a weapon." Lisa felt her patience finally beginning to wear thin. "Officers, I've already told you what I'm carrying. I've submitted to a search, I've allowed you to verify my identity, and I've answered all of your questions. How much more cooperation do you need from me?" The tone in her voice had shifted slightly, carrying more authority than it had before. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being in command, someone used to having their word trusted and their decisions respected. But instead of de-escalating the situation, it seemed to have the opposite effect on some of the officers. "I need you to lower your voice and continue following our instructions," David said, his own stress level rising again. The entire encounter had taken on a life of its own, and he was beginning to feel like he was losing control of the situation. Lisa turned to face him directly for the first time since the other officers had arrived. "Officer, I haven't raised my voice. I'm simply asking reasonable questions about why I'm being treated like a criminal when I haven't done anything wrong." The direct eye contact and confident tone triggered something in David's mind. His training had taught him that suspects who challenged authority or tried to take control of encounters were often the most dangerous. Combined with the stress of the situation and the presence of the growing crowd of onlookers, he felt his anxiety spike. "Turn back around and face the vehicle," David ordered, his voice now carrying a sharp edge. "You're not in charge here, and you need to remember that." The words hit Lisa like a physical blow. She had dedicated her life to serving her country, had commanded troops in life-and-death situations, and had earned the respect of her peers through years of sacrifice and dedication. Being told to remember her place by a police officer during a routine traffic stop felt like a fundamental violation of everything she had worked for. "I'm not trying to be in charge of anything," Lisa replied, her voice steady, but carrying an unmistakable note of dignity. "I'm trying to understand why I'm being treated this way when I've done nothing wrong." Officer Thompson stepped forward, sensing that the situation was reaching a critical point. "Everyone needs to take a step back here," he said, looking at both Lisa and his fellow officers. "Let's all calm down and figure out how to resolve this professionally." But his words came too late. The tension that had been building throughout the encounter had reached a breaking point. The smallest miscommunication was about to turn the situation into something none of them had intended. Lisa, feeling overwhelmed by the entire experience, reached into her jacket pocket to retrieve her cell phone. She wanted to call her commanding officer, someone who could vouch for her identity and help bring this nightmare to an end. It was a reasonable action, but in the charged atmosphere of the moment, it was interpreted very differently. "She's reaching for something," Officer Kim shouted, his hand moving toward his weapon. "Stop. Keep your hands where we can see them." The sudden shout caused Lisa to freeze mid-motion, her hand still partially in her pocket. She looked around at the four officers, all of whom were now focused intently on her movements, and realized that the situation had just taken a dangerous turn. Time seemed to slow down as everyone on the scene processed what was happening. Lisa's hand was in her pocket. The officers were reaching for their weapons, and the crowd of neighbors was watching from a distance, some with their phones already recording the encounter. In that moment, Lisa understood that her life had just changed forever, regardless of how the next few seconds played out. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the quiet neighborhood like thunder on a clear night. Lisa felt the impact hit her shoulder, spinning her around before she collapsed against her car and then slumped to the ground. The pain was immediate and intense, but her military training kicked in automatically. She had been wounded before. She knew how to stay conscious and assess her situation. Officer David Chen stood frozen, his service weapon still drawn, staring at what he had just done. His hands were shaking, and he could barely process that. He had actually pulled the trigger. In that split second when Lisa had reached into her pocket, every alarm in his head had gone off. His training had taken over before his rational mind could catch up. "Officer down. Civilian down," David shouted into his radio, his voice cracking with stress. "We need an ambulance immediately." Shots fired, one person wounded. The other 3 officers rushed to secure the scene. Officer Gonzalez immediately went to Lisa, who was conscious but clearly in pain, pressing her hand against the wound on her shoulder. Officer Thompson began setting up a perimeter to keep the growing crowd of neighbors at a safe distance, while Officer Kim tried to help. David processed what had just happened. "What did you see? What made you shoot?" Kim asked David, his own adrenaline pumping as he tried to understand the sequence of events that had led to this moment. David holstered his weapon with trembling hands. "She reached into her pocket after. We told her to keep her hands visible, I thought. I thought she was going for a weapon. Everything happened so fast." Lisa, despite her pain, managed to speak in a weak but clear voice. "My phone," she gasped, looking up at Officer Gonzalez, who was kneeling beside her. "Was just trying to get my phone to call my commanding officer. I wanted someone to verify who I am." The words hit everyone like a second gunshot. Officer Gonzalez carefully reached into Lisa's jacket pocket and pulled out a standard smartphone. Nothing more threatening than what millions of people carried every day. The sight of it made David sink to his knees on the asphalt. The full weight of what had happened crashing down on him. The sound of sirens filled the air as emergency vehicles raced toward the scene. Within minutes, paramedics were working on Lisa, checking her vital signs and preparing to transport her to the hospital. The shoulder wound was serious, but not life-threatening, and Lisa remained conscious throughout the initial treatment. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name and where you are?" one of the paramedics asked as they prepared the stretcher. "Commander Lisa Washington, United States Army," she replied, her voice stronger now, despite the pain. "I'm on Maple Street, and I was shot by a police officer during a traffic stop for a broken taillight." The paramedic paused in his work, looking up at the officers who were standing nearby. The absurdity of the situation was becoming clear to everyone present. A decorated military officer had been shot while trying to show her identification during a routine traffic stop, as the ambulance pulled away with Lisa inside. The scene on Maple Street transformed into something resembling a crime scene investigation. Police supervisors arrived, followed by detectives, and eventually representatives from the department's Internal Affairs Division. The entire area was cordoned off with yellow tape, and every officer who had been present was separated for individual interviews. David Chen sat in the back of a supervisor's car, trying to explain what had happened, while also trying to understand it himself. His career, his reputation, and possibly his freedom were now in jeopardy, because of a split-second decision that had seemed necessary in the moment, but looked increasingly unjustifiable with each passing minute. "Officer Chen, I need you to walk me through exactly what you saw and what you were thinking when you decided to discharge your weapon," Sergeant Williams said, his notepad ready to document every detail of the incident. David took a shaky breath before beginning his account. She had been acting unusually calm throughout the entire stop. Even after backup arrived and we were questioning her credentials, she maintained this composed demeanor that seemed off to me. When she reached into her pocket after we specifically told her to keep her hands visible, I believed she was reaching for a weapon. Sergeant Williams wrote down every word, but he was already beginning to see the problems with the narrative. A broken taillight had escalated into a shooting, and the victim was a military officer who had been trying to cooperate with the investigation. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Lisa was being treated by doctors who were both impressed by her composure and horrified by the circumstances that had brought her to them. The bullet had passed through her shoulder without hitting any major arteries or bones, but the psychological impact of the incident was evident in her eyes. Dr. Martinez, the attending physician, had treated gunshot victims before, but this case was different. "Commander Washington, you're going to make a full physical recovery," he told her as nurses finished bandaging her wound. "The bullet went clean through, and there's no permanent damage to your shoulder." Lisa nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about her years of service, her deployments overseas, and the irony that she had been shot not by an enemy combatant in a war zone, but by a police officer on a quiet street in her own neighborhood. Her cell phone, the object that had nearly cost her life, buzzed with incoming calls and messages. Word was already spreading through her military network about what had happened. Fellow officers, subordinates, and superiors were reaching out to offer support and express their disbelief at the situation. Colonel Peterson, her immediate supervisor, at the Pentagon, arrived at the hospital within an hour of the shooting. He found Lisa sitting up in her hospital bed, her arm in a sling, but her posture still maintaining the dignity that had defined her. Military career, Lisa, what in God's name happened out there? Colonel Peterson asked, pulling up a chair beside her bed. She recounted the entire incident. From the initial traffic stop to the moment she was shot while reaching for her phone. With each detail, Colonel Peterson's expression grew darker. Had served alongside Lisa for years and knew her to be one of the most professional and level-headed officers in the Army. This is going to be a nightmare for everyone involved, he said, shaking his head. The media is already picking up the story. A decorated Army commander shot by police during a traffic stop. This is going to be front-page news across the country. Lisa hadn't even thought about the media attention yet. She had been focused on understanding what had happened and dealing with the physical pain of her wound. But she realized that Colonel Peterson was right. This incident was going to become much bigger than just a local police matter. Outside the hospital, news crews were already setting up their equipment. The neighbor who had been recording the encounter on their phone had uploaded the video to social media, where it was being shared thousands of times every hour. The footage clearly showed a woman being shot while reaching into her pocket, and the revelation that she was a military officer was adding fuel to an already explosive story. Back at the police station, Officer David Chen was being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. His weapon had been confiscated, his badge temporarily suspended, and his entire life had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. The weight of what he had done was crushing him. He had joined the police force to serve and protect his community, not to shoot innocent people during traffic stops. But he also couldn't shake the feeling that he had been following his training and doing what he thought was necessary to protect himself and his fellow officers. As the night wore on, the incident continued to grow in scope and complexity, affecting not just Lisa and David, but their families, their colleagues, and eventually the entire nation. 6 months had passed since that night on Maple Street, but for Lisa Washington, it felt like a lifetime. She sat in her Pentagon office, her shoulder fully healed, but her perspective on everything forever changed. The physical therapy had been successful, and she had regained full use of her arm. The emotional healing, however, was proving to be much more complicated. The case had become exactly what Colonel Peterson had predicted, a national story that dominated headlines for weeks. The video recorded by her neighbor had been viewed millions of times online, sparking conversations about police training, racial bias, and the treatment of military veterans. Lisa had never wanted to be the center of such attention, but she found herself thrust into a role she never expected to play. Her phone buzzed with another interview request from a major news network. She had stopped counting how many media outlets had reached out to her. Everyone wanted her story, her perspective, her opinion on police reform. What they didn't seem to understand was that she was still processing the experience herself. Lisa pushed the interview request aside and focused on the document in front of her. It was a proposal for new training protocols that would be implemented in police departments across the country. The training would focus on de-escalation techniques and better communication with military personnel during routine encounters. It was progress, but it had come at a cost that no one should have had to pay. Meanwhile, across town, David Chen was sitting in his therapist's office for his weekly appointment. The departmental investigation had concluded 4 months ago, and he had been cleared of criminal charges. The review board had determined that while his decision to shoot had been a mistake, it was not criminally negligent given the circumstances and his perception of the threat at the time, but being cleared legally didn't ease the guilt that had been eating away at him since that night. He had shot an innocent woman, a decorated military officer who had been trying to cooperate with his investigation. The fact that she had survived and made a full physical recovery was the only thing that allowed him to sleep at night. "How are you feeling about returning to work next week?" Dr. Harrison asked, looking at David with the patient expression that had become familiar over the past months. David shifted in his chair. still uncomfortable with these conversations even after months of therapy. I don't know if I'm ready. Every time I think about putting on the uniform again, I see her face. I see the moment when I realized what I had done. The department had offered him a desk job, a chance to ease back into police work without the stress of street patrol. His supervisors understood that officer-involved shootings, even justified ones, often had lasting psychological effects on the officers involved, but David wasn't sure if any police work was right for him anymore. "What does your family think about you going back?" Dr. Harrison asked. David's wife had been incredibly supportive throughout the entire ordeal, but he knew the stress was taking a toll on their marriage. Their 2 young children had heard their classmates talking about the incident, and they had started asking questions that David didn't know how to answer. "Maria thinks I should consider a career change," David admitted. "She says she can see how much this has changed me, and she's worried about what might happen if I get into another situation like that." The therapy sessions were helping, but David knew that the real test would come when he was back on the streets, making split-second decisions under pressure. The department had provided additional training on de-escalation and cultural sensitivity, but he wondered if that would be enough to prevent another tragedy. Lisa, meanwhile, had been working with civil rights organizations and police reform advocates to push for systemic changes. She had testified before Congress about her experience and had met with police chiefs from major cities across the country. The work was important, but it was also emotionally draining. Every time she told her story, she had to relive that night. She had to remember the confusion, the fear, and the moment when she realized that the officer was going to shoot her. But she also knew that her voice carried weight in these discussions precisely because she was both a victim of police violence and a career military officer. "Commander Washington, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with our officers today," Chief Roberts said as Lisa finished her presentation to the Metro Police Department. "Your perspective is invaluable in helping us understand how these situations can escalate." Lisa nodded politely, but she was tired. She was tired of being the poster child for police reform, tired of having her worst day turned into a teaching moment, and tired of the way people looked at her now. Some saw her as a hero for speaking out, others as a troublemaker who was unfairly attacking law enforcement. Neither perception felt accurate to her. The civil lawsuit against the police. The department had been settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. The money would help cover her medical expenses and provide some compensation for her suffering. But it couldn't undo what had happened. More importantly to Lisa, the settlement included provisions for new training protocols and policy changes that might prevent similar incidents in the future. She had also started a foundation that provided support to other victims of police violence, particularly military veterans who had been involved in confrontations with law enforcement. The foundation offered legal assistance, counseling services, and advocacy support. It was meaningful work, but it kept her connected to the trauma in ways that sometimes made moving forward difficult. David had decided to take the desk job, at least temporarily. He spent his days processing reports and handling administrative tasks far removed from the street-level police work that had defined his career. It was safer for everyone involved. But it also felt like admitting defeat. His relationship with his fellow officers had become complicated. Some supported him and understood that he had been doing his job as he saw it. Others questioned his judgment and worried about how the incident reflected on the entire department. The solidarity that had once defined his work environment had been replaced by an uncomfortable tension that followed him everywhere. One afternoon, David made a decision that surprised even himself. He asked his supervisor for Lisa's contact information. He wanted to apologize to her directly, not through lawyers or media statements, but face to face. It took weeks to arrange the meeting, with both their legal teams involved in every detail. They met at a neutral location, a conference room in a downtown office building. Lisa arrived first, still carrying herself with the military bearing that had never left her, though David could see the wariness in her eyes when she looked at him. "Commander Washington, I want you to know how sorry I am for what happened that night," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've replayed that moment 1,000 times, and I wish I could change what I did." Lisa studied his face for a long moment before responding. "Officer Chen, I appreciate you reaching out to me. I can see that this has been difficult for you too. But I need you to understand that your apology, while meaningful, doesn't erase what happened or fix the problems in the system that led to it. They talked for almost an hour, two people whose lives had been forever changed by a few seconds on a dark street. Neither of them left the meeting feeling completely satisfied, but both understood each other better than they had before. The conversation marked a turning point for both of them. Lisa realized that healing didn't require forgiveness, but it did require understanding. David understood that his personal guilt, while valid, wasn't the most important part of this story. The focus needed to be on preventing future incidents, not on absolving him of responsibility. As the first anniversary of the shooting approached, both Lisa and David found themselves reflecting on how much their lives had changed. Lisa had been promoted to a new position that allowed her to work on military-civilian relations, using her experience to build bridges between communities. David had decided to leave police work entirely and was training to become a counselor, hoping to help other officers deal with the psychological challenges of law enforcement. The incident on Maple Street had been a tragedy, but it had also become a catalyst for conversations and changes that were long overdue. Neither Lisa nor David would have chosen to be part of this story, but they had both found ways to ensure that their experience might prevent others from going through the same ordeal. The broken taillight that had started, it all had been a symbol of something small that led to something much larger. In the end, it had broken more than just a car light. It had broken assumptions, exposed flaws in the system, and forced two communities to confront uncomfortable truths about justice, safety, and the price of misunderstanding.